everyone. My name is David McLeod. I am your life mastery coach and author of the fabulous little book, A Life to Die For. I'm also one of the co-authors in the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. This is, believe it or not, episode 222. A lot of twos today. And our title is From Conflict to Connection. You know, no matter how fabulous your life might be, there's a good chance that you've had to deal with some type of conflict at some point in your life. And maybe if you haven't, it's almost impossible to avoid. So you probably will at some point. But for most people, the idea of conflict tends to bring up negative images and ideas, which leads to conflict avoidance. Now, this is understandable, but the reality is that conflict is not inherently destructive. On the contrary, conflict can actually be a powerful catalyst for creativity and connection. Now, all conflict starts with basically a difference of perspective or opinion. Since most people seem pretty attached to their beliefs and opinions, and I include myself amongst those, and that's thanks to the power of the ego mind. They also tend to want to defend their positions. So it's ultimately this defensiveness that leads to some of the more unpleasant aspects of conflict that most of us seek to avoid. For this episode of Life Mastery TV, I've invited back my friend and colleague, Marisa Ferrera, to join me for this conversation. Marisa is the #1 best-selling author of the book, Magnify Your Magnificence, Your Pathway to the Life and Relationships You Truly Desire. As a woman's empowerment coach and mentor, she supports heart-centered women who struggle with family conflict and drama to authentically express themselves and stand in their divine feminine power so they can create healthy boundaries and more harmonious relationships. Please welcome back the delightful and wise magnificence mentor, Marisa Ferrera.
Hello.
There you go. Welcome back, Marisa. It's so good to have you on here again. I think it's been about a year, since the last time you were on the show.
It has been. I looked back and it was actually June of last year. So
was it? Yeah. Well, it's always great to have people on this show who know what they're talking about and who have amazing perspectives on different aspects of life. And I know that you work with people all the time about dealing with all kinds of issues in order to get them towards their magnificence. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, your life journey? What is it that led you to understand the power of conflict in this way?
That's a great question. Well, for me, it wasn't something I thought I was going to be doing when I started out, in my young adult years. I had a very different vision and had a different career actually in teaching. However, what led me here was based on my past experience, just growing up in a very dysfunctional family where myself, my sisters, and my mom experienced a lot of emotional and physical abuse at the hands of my father, who just didn't know how to deal with his anger and his rage and projected that onto us. And so that left me growing up feeling very disempowered. I had no voice. It was safer, to not speak, just be that fly on the wall and be invisible. And so I went through a lot of years where I really didn't know how to have healthy relationships with people. I didn't know how to have any relationship. Actually, I avoided relationships because I didn't feel even good enough to be engaged in relationships. So I struggled quite a bit. And over the years, I did end up getting some counseling and some support to help me to find my voice and deal with some of the trauma so that it wouldn't be impacting me in such negative ways. And I always wanted to have a better relationship with my father, but I didn't know how because I was terrified of him growing up, right? And so it took me a while to heal from some of my own wounds and to really become empowered and to find my voice and to create boundaries and to find ways to communicate with him where I could ask for what I needed and wanted in terms of our dialogue. And our relationship really shifted. And so I feel really grateful that that happened before his passing in 2015, because I mean, it's not that we can't heal relationships with parents that are, or loved ones that are deceased. We can, but it just felt really good that I was able to be one of his primary caregivers for the last couple months of his life, and be that from a place of genuine love and wanting to be there, not thinking, you know, I had to be because I'm a daughter and that's what good daughters do. And so over the years, you know, I've met many people that also struggle with relationships, and really finding their voice and dealing with conflict in ways that leads to peace and connection, like this topic is all about. And so I realized that I had learned a lot and had created not only a great relationship with my father, but also with my current husband, which is my second marriage. The first one, I was learning, like a lot of people, right? I didn't deal with conflict very well at all. And so I really understand the power of when we're able to handle conflict in constructive and positive ways. The impact it can have is just so beautiful and really can lead us to having deeper connections. And so I like to share what I've learned along my own journey with others who want to experience something similar.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, you covered a lot of ground there, and one thing that I heard that seems to be a common thread for a lot of people is dealing with a parent or both parents who are themselves dysfunctional. They haven't learned how to deal with their own emotions and stuff like that. And I, you know, not to disparage our parents or even the people, their parents. It's just that I don't think they really knew or understood what they were getting involved in. And so we learned bad habits. Hell, I learned bad habits as a father, and they were conditioned into me because of the way society operates. You know, women are encouraged to be the ones who share their emotion. You know, they can share anything they want except anger. Anger is reserved for the men. And so what we end up with is completely dysfunctional arrangement where the men are angry and the women are abused by that anger. Now, occasionally we get the reverse happening and the women are angry and the man is kind of wimpy or whatever. We call it wimpy when he doesn't get angry, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, we have all kinds of labels for people that don't fit into, like you said, those stereotypical ideas of how we're supposed to act and behave.
Right. And so I think what's really beautiful about what's going on now is so many of us are coming to understand that there are no bad emotions. There's just simply acceptable or unacceptable ways of dealing with those emotions. And if I deal with my emotion by inflicting pain on other people, well, that's not exactly an acceptable way of doing things. And similarly, you know, this is true for all of us. We're all learning, and I think we're growing, and I think we're expanding, and I think we're getting better at this. So I'm grateful to be able to continue doing these shows because we bring more people like you into the public awareness, and more wisdom is shared. I just noticed a couple of people joined us. I want to say thank you for joining and welcome. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to put them into the chat below, and we'll do our best to respond to whatever it is you share. Okay, now you talked a little bit about, well, you've gone through a couple of marriages. I've done the same, but I left my second marriage as well. So I'm now single. I've been single for probably 16 years now. And I think I'm gonna stay that way. I've done a lot of growth, shall we say, but I'm not sure I've yet reached that point where I'm ready to step into a marriage with somebody, because I'm still worried that I might, you know, revert to old patterns or something like that. So that's a little bit of transparency about me. But anyway.
That's a legitimate fear, because, but you know what, I think it's great that you're actually aware, because that's the first step, as I know you know, and many people know. Awareness is our first step to really being able to shift and change some of the patterns that we notice about ourselves. And so I really do believe that we're all capable of transforming some of those negative patterns that don't really serve us, and to really create what we desire. And believe it or not, it's in relationship that we actually have more and more opportunities to grow and evolve if we're open to it and to taking responsibility for the stuff that comes up, when the triggers are happening and the conflict, because that's where the greatest growth can happen is through conflict. That's why I was saying, we talk about, you mentioned earlier, or when you were introducing the topic, that most people or many people avoid conflict because it can be very uncomfortable. It can be very painful. So I like to bring a new perspective to the whole idea of conflict and see it as a gift and as an opportunity for growth, expansion, and for creating deeper connections with ourselves and with the people that we care about. It's very possible if you have the tools and the awareness of what you can do when conflict arises.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the other important word, relationship. I personally think that relationship is probably the greatest gift that we have uh, as human beings, living on this planet, expressing our spiritual nature in whatever way we do. Because imagine if we didn't have relationship. Imagine what it would be like if you were all alone, if there were no animals, if there were no trees, if there were no flowers. I mean, if you were just suspended in some kind of colorless liquid or something, what good would that be? You go insane almost immediately. Uh, and so it's really relationship, not only with people, but also with, animals and stuff, and even inanimate objects, because we get to experience aspects of ourselves in terms of our relationship with everything in our world. And that's the beauty of it. And so sometimes we're going to run into situations that, I'm showing up one way and this thing I'm in a relationship with is showing up a different way. And I may judge that there's conflict there. And so before we go any deeper, I want to ask you if you can give us, what is your definition of conflict?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've even ever defined it, but I think for me, conflict is really any time that we have a disagreement or a different perspective on something, and we have something within us that gets triggered. We're not able to just accept somebody else's point of view without feeling some kind of upset or disturbance within ourselves. So that's where it begins, I think, because if we're just having a conversation with somebody and they have a different opinion or a different perspective, and we're fine with it, it doesn't stir up any negative or unpleasant emotions, then there's no conflict. So it's not actually just a difference of opinion, it's our reactions. When we feel a reaction to somebody's opinion or point of view, or to a situation in our life that we're not happy with, then there's a conflict happening. Because conflict can be internal, or it doesn't have to involve somebody else, like you were mentioning, right? We can have an internal conflict about our circumstances. So anytime I think we're feeling any unpleasant and undesirable emotions that are evoked within us, we're experiencing a conflict of some sort.
Right. And you mentioned another important word, and that is trigger. And I think that the word trigger itself implies some kind of a negative reaction. And here's a funny thing that I have noticed in our world. Maybe it's not so funny, but so often people are not willing to take responsibility for their own triggers. They would rather point the finger out and say, you hurt my feelings. You triggered me into this behavior. You pushed my buttons. And therefore they're kind of causing the blame to go outwards. Well, the moment you do that, you're adding to the conflict.
Yes.
Anybody who has the courage to say, I'm noticing I'm having a reaction right now. I'm noticing that I've got a little trigger going on. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a little break and just kind of deal with that for a moment before I say anything more. Can you imagine how the other person would respond? Oh, wow. Well, thank you for telling me. Yeah. The conflict is almost gone immediately.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said that, David, because part of the description when you shared about this conversation we were having today, we said we would be talking about how to resolve conflict, steps to resolving conflict. And that's actually my number one step that I tell people is to take 100% responsibility for all your reactions, your emotions, your feelings. And that doesn't mean you're blaming yourself either. See, people seem to put those together. That when we
Right.
say take responsibility, it means blame. And I like to say, can we just leave the word blame out of the equation? Because why does anybody have to be to blame? When we take responsibility, that's when we have the power to make to create a different outcome. Because as long as we keep pointing the finger and blaming, we have no power. We're giving our power away to the circumstance or the person that we're blaming. Nothing changes. It just gets worse. So that is the first step.
Right. And I think that there's another little learning here that people can think about. And the word responsibility itself, just think about the word itself. Now, it isn't spelled this way, but you can imagine it to mean your ability to respond. Response ability. That's what I remind myself. So it's not like by taking responsibility, I am assigning blame to myself or fault or any of that stuff. I am simply saying, okay, if it's my responsibility, if I have the ability to respond, how am I going to choose to respond? And that's the key point here. As soon as you understand you have a response ability, now you also know that you have a choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing where it's difficult to have choice is when we go into reaction mode, because when we react to our triggers, we're not even aware. And we go into what I call a child state, right? Because we don't, like, all our intellect goes out the window when we've been triggered and we end up reacting to somebody. We just go into that little child and start reacting from that place. And so we have no capacity to rationalize or to think with our intellect, right? And so it's really important. That's really the second step, is to recognize that when you've been triggered, once you become aware of it, to recognize that you've activated an unhealed wound, and just be willing to look at what might that wound be. And we all have, many people have certain core wounds, right? It's what we make the situation mean, right? When we get triggered, many times we're reacting because of the meaning that we've attached to whatever that person said or didn't say, or what they did or didn't do. And it can be as simple as, oh, you think I'm stupid. That was one of my big core, right? Because of my upbringing. That would come up for me a lot. And the person would not be thinking I'm stupid, but because I'm carrying that pain inside of me and that trauma, I'm going to interpret your behaviors as if that's what you're thinking, and I'm reacting to that, right? So that's one of them, right? Or the I'm not worthy, or you're not going to tell me what to do if somebody's, felt like their whole life they've been told what to do. So that's really the second step, is to really be able to take a deeper look. Once you've taken responsibility and you know it's your stuff, be willing to explore a little more deeply and see, can I determine what is it that's coming up for me? Because once you can identify it, then you can go to that third step, which is take the steps to heal from it. So it's no longer running your life, basically.
You said, taking responsibility and reminding yourself that it's your stuff. This is a very, very important point. What I have learned in my life and in my relationships is that it's all my stuff. Even if I imagine it's your stuff, it's really my stuff. Now, it might be true that I have, in my calm state, I might be able to notice something about how you are behaving or how you are reacting. And I might be able to offer you some feedback about that. But even that, in the gentlest form I can deliver it, it's still about me, because I'm the one who's having this reaction or response or whatever that that's leading me to think, oh, this poor child needs some support. Let me just offer some feedback. Well,
that's an important, I'm glad you mentioned that, David, because that's something else I want to mention that can really support people to not escalate conflict, because, a lot of times we do things intending to be of service or to help. Like you said, you're thinking, well, this person's not aware of, how they're being. And, in my great wisdom, I'm going to share with them. Right. And it often backfires, because the other person, it just reacts, because it just triggers them even more. Right.
That's right.
So one thing I love to remind people of is that it's so important to not actually give any unsolicited advice or feedback without first asking permission. because
Right.
it's the permission that we need to have in order for that person to be even this remotely open to hearing what we have to say. And most people will give permission when you ask because they're curious. And a simple way to do it is just say, I'm noticing that you're getting, really upset about this. Are you open to some feedback? Are you open to some support? Or do you just want me to listen? Obviously, this is if they're not abusing you, because you're not going to just sit there and be a
Right.
doormat. That's a
Exactly.
different conversation. But if they're
That's
just
right.
expressing and
Yeah.
you're seeing things going on in them that you feel you could contribute something to help them, then just ask. Do you just want to vent, or are you looking for some feedback or advice? And then if they say no, please, what do you have? Then they're going to be open to what you're saying and grateful, instead of if you just blurt it out and say, well, you know what I think you should do, or you know what I'm seeing, they're going to be, right?
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of really good stuff here too. That all has to do with the power of communication.
Yes.
And one of the things that I have learned is, if somebody is like upset about something, and I just happen to be the recipient of that upset, I can stand there and I can say, all right, can I pause you for just a moment? And then I can say something like this: are you just wanting to vent,
Yes.
or would you like me to respond? I can
Exactly.
listen here if you like, and we can just be that way. But if you want me to help you work through this, let me know.
Yeah, because I'd
So
be
it doesn't
happy
just
to.
become a
Yeah.
one-on-one or a
Mm-hmm.
head bashing kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
I do that when the other person is upset, if I do that, it helps me stay calm and grounded while they go off
Yes.
and do their
Yes.
venting.
Yeah, it's so true, David, because, and I learned this the hard way, because I have a lot of empathy and compassion for people. And so when I'm experiencing somebody really having like pain and suffering, and I really feel like there's something I know that could really support them to not be suffering, I want to give that to them. To me, it's kind of like, I don't want
Exactly.
to see you suffer. Like, I want to give this to you. But I'm telling you, when I've given in the past, what I thought, like I said, was a gift. Like, I thought, I'm going to help you not have this pain. Like, it was really coming from my heart.
Yeah.
I've had my head chewed off. I've had people react like, and really, and before I understood what was going on, that traumatized me, because I thought, I don't understand. Like, I'm just sincerely trying to help. I don't understand why I'm being treated like that, until I
Absolutely.
learned that it wasn't about me. Their reactions, their triggered responses and projecting onto me had nothing to do with me. And it was their unhealed wounds all happening. Well, I didn't know any of that stuff before. So I would just take it personally and get depressed and think, geez, like, I can't believe that they treated me so badly. And now I recognize and I ask permission. And sometimes I have to bite my tongue because I can see things so clearly sometimes. And I'm not saying this from an ego place, it's really sincerely from my heart and from my intuition. I can see a path that can really support somebody in freeing themselves from whatever they're experiencing, but I just don't say a word unless I ask permission and they're open to it. And I just have to sit with my own discomfort at not being able to contribute when I really want to, because they're not ready. And I
Yeah.
need to just love them where they're at and just be okay with that. So that's been a struggle for me, to just learn to be okay with not sharing a gift that isn't, the person's not ready for.
I learned a great process um, quite a few years ago. In fact, I helped to develop it, and it's really about helping the other person to get down to the truth of what's really going on without making any judgment about it at
Mm-hmm,
all.
mm-hmm.
So what happens is, if the other person is quite upset, I can just put up my hand gently. I say, would you mind just kind of taking a breath here so I can kind of absorb what you're saying? And if it's okay with you, I'd like to use that as a signal. When I think you're getting a little activated, I might just put my hand up and gently invite you to take a breath. Then what happens is, if the other person's willing to do this,
Mm-hmm.
then what happens is, often the other person will then, just by taking that breath, will begin to descend from up here
Yes.
down into their heart, and they start to share what's really going on. And you may discover, yeah, this is really, I remember when I was 5 years old and my father did such and such, or my mother did X and Y, and I just felt so small. I felt unimportant, or whatever the story is. And I said, yeah, I get it. I understand. Unimportant. Yeah, that's probably what's going on right now. Maybe
Well, that's
not. I
beautiful.
don't know
I love that.
what's going
Yeah.
on,
Yeah,
So
that's a beautiful process, David. Thank you for sharing that.
it's
Because,
really easy.
like you said, if you and then to just say, like you were saying about asking permission, a simple way, after you say, would that be okay with you? Just end with saying, I may put my hand up to invite you to take a breath. Is that okay with you? And most people are going to say yes. Like, who's going to say no? That's not okay with me.
Right.
Especially when you're saying it from your heart. You're not saying it in a state of judgment for how they're showing up. And that's the key when you mentioned the judgment. That's so important, not to judge others or ourselves.
Well, and unfortunately, judgment is what we do. It comes from our ego mind. It's what we do, and we just have to own it. That's the point. But what I also tend to do is I try not to use words to describe what I think the other person is feeling. Like, it seems like you're angry, or it seems like you're sad, or whatever. I don't like to use words like that, because I could be dead wrong. I am projecting my own understanding of sadness or anger or fear on the other person, saying, this is how I've seen it before, so I'm assuming that that's true for you. Rather, I say, can you just, again, I'll go into this pause, and can you share a little bit with me about what you are feeling and where you are feeling it in your body? That often is enough to diffuse all the chit chat and the yelling and the raging that's going on, and to get down to the truth. It's powerful.
It is, David. And I totally understand where you're coming from when you said, to say it seems like you're whatever, because that can trigger a person too, because like, well, no, I'm not. Right. But I do want to, it's a great opportunity for me to share. There is a process that I've learned. Actually, I think you mentioned in the introduction that I'm a certified connection practice coach. And the connection practice process, part of that process, the first part is, or the beginning of it, is to help people identify their feelings. But a part of it is not saying, it seems to me that you're angry, but it is about sometimes like inviting them to express what they're feeling first. But many times we have difficulty when we're in a state of upset or dealing with a conflict. We don't see our own blind spots. And sometimes we have difficulty even identifying our feelings. And so what the connection practice process helps people with is the coach will actually say to the person, not, it seems like you're angry, just say, with this situation involving whatever is going on, I'm guessing that you might be feeling angry. Is that right? Now, when you do it that way and you're guessing and you tell them ahead of time, they know ahead of time that you're going to be guessing some of their emotions, some of their feelings, then they might, sometimes it helps them. They'll say, yeah, that's true. And it helps them feel that you're being empathic. And other times they'll say, no, it's not anger. It's more, and it helps them, fine tune and go even deeper, even if you're wrong. But it's not a wrongness that creates a trigger. So there is a way that we can support people with what we're sensing might be going on, but not by asserting that's what it is, by saying it as a guess, right? So that is part of the process.
It's about using curious and invitational language.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And everybody can do that, by the way.
Yes,
we are all naturally able to do that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you could ask questions that begin with what or how, rather than why, or just open-ended, is this thing, you want to make it open-ended. Sure. What? Tell me a little bit about what's going on for you. How are you feeling? I notice your arms moving a lot when you're talking. So what's going on in your arm? What's going on there? And I find that just by pointing to certain things in the body, and that if somebody pointed out my arm flying around, I might just look at it and say, what is that? It's a great way to create curiosity and to help someone process something without imposing any judgment or
Mm-hmm.
guessing or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, just asking
Mm-hmm.
questions,
Mm-hmm.
invitational, curious questions. But
Yes.
I like the
Yes.
idea of, when I'm not sure what's going on, sometimes I can guess. I can
Mm-hmm.
suggest,
Mm-hmm.
here are a few things that I'm noticing. You tell me if I'm right or wrong,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then see what
And
happens.
yeah. And the next step that's really critical, and this is part of the connection practice coaching process as well, is once the person has identified their feelings, the important next step is to look at what's underneath those feelings. What needs are not being met? Because our feelings, if we go deeper, they're usually because of an unmet need. So somebody might be feeling angry because their need for being appreciated is not being met in a particular moment.
Right.
Or maybe they have a need to be seen for who they are, and they feel that somebody's just not seeing them for who they are. Or maybe they have a need for communication, healthier communication that's not being met. So when we help them to identify their unmet needs, that also supports people in going through that process of healing and coming to a peaceful resolution.
Right. I think that you mentioned about processing the emotions, and I think that's an important part too. Identifying the emotion is not the same as processing it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be really clear, that energy is in your body and it's trying to find its way out. That's what's going on here. And what we want to do is we want to find a safe way to let it out so that
Mm-hmm.
nobody gets hurt, especially the person with the emotional issue,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody else outside of that person. So if you
Mm-hmm.
can encourage the person, yeah, I notice your hands moving, just let that happen. Let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that's about, but just moving your hand might be enough to start that whole process of getting the
Mm-hmm.
emotion out. And before you know it, the
Mm-hmm.
other hand's moving, and then the body's
Yes.
moving, and when
Yes.
that body moves, the energy starts flowing. And I say, great,
Mm-hmm.
great, let that flow. And if there's a sound associated with it, let that come
Mm-hmm.
out too.
Yes.
It doesn't have
Yes.
to have any words associated with it, just the
Mm-hmm.
sound. It might sound like wailing or moaning, or it might sound like screaming, or it might
Mm-hmm.
be, who knows? I don't know how it's going to
Mm-hmm.
come out. I've seen all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of different things. But the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of
Mm-hmm.
it is just letting that happen and creating the safe space for that allows the person to diffuse all the energy. And when that happens, they kind of get to a place of almost emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when I ask, okay, great. Now we've gotten that stuff out. Take a look around your body. Just close your eyes and look around. Tell me what's there now.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
needs to be loved? What needs to be healed? And let's bring some love and healing to that part. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
to know the
Mm-hmm.
story. I don't need to know
Yes.
that maybe it had to do with a rape that happened. That's curiosity. I don't need to know that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you
Mm-hmm.
want to share it, if that happens to come out, fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If
Right?
that's part of the release for them.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Giving voice to something, sorry,
That's
can
right.
sometimes help with the healing as
Right.
well.
And I've seen so many coaches try to get all the gory details. I'm thinking, that is none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the person voluntarily chooses to share it for some reason and asks for some extra support around it, just
Mm-hmm.
leave it alone. Let the
Mm-hmm.
process, the flow, the energetic
Mm-hmm.
release lead to its own healing. And that is where the gift is.
Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, I haven't talked about this for quite a while. That felt good to do that.
No, it's a great process because again, when we can hold space for people to express a lot of their emotions, like you said, if it's anger or rage or disappointment or sadness, and it's easier for us to do that when we heal our own stuff and when we're not actually in a situation where we're triggered and the other person's triggered. When we're in a conflicting situation with somebody else and we've got our own stuff coming up, then it's difficult to hold space for the other because we're in our own child state, let's say, right? And so, and unless we're able to, like we were saying earlier, take responsibility and let the other person know, I'm noticing this feeling is coming up right now. And it's another thing I learned is that sometimes even when we're aware that we're responsible, we still don't always take responsibility in the heat of the moment, right? And we can know whatever we want, but triggers can happen on autopilot. And so what I've learned is that when I catch myself projecting onto another, which would normally be my husband because I spend the most time with him, right? I'm at a place now where it doesn't take long. Like something could just blurt out of my mouth in an upset way. And I immediately know, because that's not my normal state of being. I'm usually very calm and loving. So when something comes out that's kind of out of the ordinary, I'll go like, wow, what you just said really triggered me. What's coming up for me is, and I'll share what's happening, and I'll apologize and say, I'm really sorry I projected that onto you because I know this isn't about you. And just apologizing really helps to diffuse a conflict as well, because the other person recognizes that, hey, you're not going to start attacking me now or continue to attack me if you've already started. Right. So it's never too late to take responsibility is really the point I'm making, even if you're not taking it from the get-go, because
exactly
when you're in reaction mode, it's like that knee-jerk thing. It's like you're not aware yet. So it's not about blaming yourself, although I did have difficulty with that, especially because I teach this stuff. So when I go there are times when I'm like, oh, I can't believe I just did that. I know better. And so I have to be very careful not to beat myself up when I slip up, just because it's what I teach and what I help people with. But, because I have my bar really high for me, and I have to recognize that I'm still a human being. I still have, even though I've spent years working on healing past wounds, there's layers like the onion, right? And so another layer has opened up for me. So I have to still look at my triggers as a gift for going even deeper, right?
And that's, you just said the key word there. It's a gift. If we could, instead of beating ourselves up, we notice something new and say, oh, look at that. I've just learned something new. What a wonderful gift. Instead of beating myself, I can build myself up.
Yes. Love that.
It's not a hard thing to do. It just is a change of habit. That's really all it is.
Yes.
And that all comes about because of that one thing you mentioned way at the beginning, and that is awareness.
Yeah, it's key.
Yep.
Yeah. Without awareness, how can we possibly change something when we don't even know it's going on? It's not possible, right? Yep. And we can become more and more aware, though. There are tips for that too, because we can do that again in relationship. Because when you're in relationship, and it doesn't have to be like somebody you live with, it can be a friend, it can be a colleague, whatever. When there's something in your behavior that you want to shift, but that you go into autopilot on, you can ask somebody if they're willing to support you. Like I'll do that with my husband. I'll say, you know what, I'm noticing that whenever this happens, I go into this automatic place. Would you be willing, if you notice it before I catch myself, to just lovingly, again, lovingly is the operative word, not judgingly.
Well, bear in mind that lovingly is going to be different for each person.
Yeah. But you tell them what that is for you. I'll say, would you mind saying X, Y, or Z to me when that happens? And that will be my clue that, oh, I've gone into that autopilot place. And so I become more aware when somebody else is bringing it to my attention with my permission. But if he were to just bring it to my attention and I didn't give permission, I would probably react even more, right? It would just trigger me more. So I'm like, but we have agreements with each other when we want to shift something in our behavior or in our languaging. Because sometimes even the words that we use cannot be very supportive to ourselves or others. And so we can set those things up to be able to become more aware, because, as we become more aware, like I said, you catch yourself, right? Sometimes I'll catch it in my mind before I say something. I'll get, I'll be at that point where I am about to say something. Then I'm like, oh no, I don't want to go there. That's my trigger ego reaction. I'm not saying it like that. So we get better and better, but we have to be willing to be compassionate with ourselves as we go through this process, because it's like anything. When we're learning a new tool or learning a new skill, we're not going to become experts trying it out once or twice, right?
Right. And you said something else earlier that I think is important, and this is a topic of projection. One of the things that I have learned, and I believe this is a true statement. Everything that we do, everything is projection. And the reality is that's one of the beauties of relationship. If I didn't have relationship, I wouldn't have you to project aspects of myself that I can't see by myself. And that is the beauty of it. And when I see certain qualities or characteristics or whatever in you, they're really aspects of myself that are being reflected to me. And they may also be true for you, but I certainly could not even see them or experience them if I didn't project it from myself to begin with. And that's something that's really, really important for people to understand. We don't just project the negative stuff.
Yes.
We project all the amazing beauty. I mean, how often do you discount your own magnificence and just notice how amazing someone else is? We all do that.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, okay, don't stop. Just become aware of it and do it less. And begin to understand that what you are seeing on the other person, no matter what it might be, is an aspect of yourself that you maybe haven't fully acknowledged yet. And so it's an opportunity. Projection is a beautiful, beautiful tool because it's an opportunity to recognize, and that is to know or remember some aspect of yourself that you've forgotten or hidden or tried to hide or repressed or denied or whatever. It's a way. This is the beauty of relationship.
Yes.
We get to see ourselves in each person that we're in relationship, not just people, but all other things that we see.
Sure.
That's
and it's interesting that when you said about projection, we can be projecting positive, what we would label as positive or negative things onto another, and it's the same with triggers. We talk mostly when we talk about triggers, people think it's a negative trigger that causes a conflict, but we can have happy triggers too, right? If you walk by a bakery shop and smell, beautiful, like the freshly baked bread, it could trigger a positive experience making bread with your grandmother. So triggers can be positive as well. And so just like the projections, our triggers and projections teach us so much about ourselves and about others if we're willing to look at it as that opportunity to learn and to grow.
Yeah. And so this is a beautiful thing. And so what is conflict really but something that causes one of those triggers or projections to come alive? That's all it really is. And actually, that isn't even the conflict. The conflict comes about when we don't want to accept what is.
Yes.
We want to change it back to what we think it should be.
Yes.
That's where conflict comes up.
Yes. And that's a big one because, I mean, who doesn't often say, in certain situations with a person or a circumstance, it's like you don't want it to be a certain way. And so you have all this anger and upset and disappointment, depression. And it's all because, like you said, we're not accepting what is. And yet acceptance is a first step too. Like when we can accept what is, that gives us the power to put our attention on where would we like to shift it to be. Not because we're angry about it, but it's like, if I want to experience something different in this relationship, where could I shift my attention instead of just being angry about the way it is now?
Yeah. And I think people need to understand a certain aspect of acceptance. Accepting something doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you condone it or that you want it to continue. But you have to face reality. You can't change something until you accept it for what it is right now.
Yes.
There was a guy who I can't remember his name, Frederick Solomon Pearls, I think his name is. He stated, nothing changes until it becomes what it is. And I thought that was a mind-bending quote that really got me thinking about it. And I said, well, how can something be other than what it is? But as I meditated on it, I began to understand what it was really talking about. Something out there already is what it is. But when I am looking at that thing, am I accepting it as what it is, or am I wanting it to be something else? That's what this is all about. Once I see something as what it is, or a person, or whatever it is, a situation, a condition, whatever, once I accept it, okay, this is how it is now. Now I can start to think more clearly about being who I am and what I am. How can I best express that in dealing with this thing that has now shown up in front of me.
And I think one of the things that I've come to learn that really helps is when we do our best to come from our heart in all these conversations and situations instead of from our ego mind, because it just gives us access to so much more. And that kind of leads me a little bit to one of the other things you were saying that we were going to talk about are some communication landmines to avoid, things that kind of add to conflict or add fuel to fire, as I like to say, right? And one of them is using the words always and never in a conversation. I mean, I know I used to say that in my first marriage. You're always
You're
late.
always doing that.
Yes, you're always late. You're never,
yeah.
You're never on time. That was one of my big ones. Right. Always and never. And when we do that, of course, we activate the other person and they go into defense mode immediately because you're attacking. And so it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, not only that, but it isn't true.
It isn't true. They'll find out the one time, well, no, because last Tuesday I was on time or whatever, right? So
exactly.
It's a no-win situation.
All right. Well, except for that one time, you're always late.
Exactly. So avoid those words, always and never. And the other one is, put downs and name calling, right? How many times when people in the heat of the moment say, you're so stupid, you're such an idiot, or I can't, and you start attacking the person with put downs. And it's like, we all know that is not going to be well received and it is not going to go well. So any hope of a peace. What happened?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah. All of a sudden, I don't know. I thought my internet went out, but I put, I thought the internet left because all of a sudden my screen went black. So I'm glad I'm here. I even plugged in my battery backup for electricity in case make sure the electricity didn't go out, but the internet I have no control over. Anyways,
well, I didn't see
we're still here.
Any disturbance in the force from here.
Oh, well, that's good to know. I had a blank screen. Anyways, what was I saying? Now I forget what I was saying. Oh, yes, I was talking about the put downs and name calling. Yes.
Right.
And how that doesn't really help because it just creates more conflict and more upset. And the other one we talked about before is yelling, right? That was something I did a lot also in my previous marriage. And I believe part of that was because I was finally finding my voice. I talked about earlier, I had no voice and never expressed myself. So I went from one end of the pendulum to the other. And many times we do that when we're learning a new way of being. I felt like I had to yell to be heard, to get my voice out, to just talk normal. That wasn't going to do it. But yelling doesn't help because it just shuts the other person down. And then they start telling you things that you want to hear just to calm you down. And that's what my ex-husband used to do. He would tell me what I wanted to hear to avoid a conflict. And then, of course, I get even more upset because he doesn't honor his word. But he'll say anything just to get me to calm down, and then he doesn't follow through. So that doesn't work either. And the blame game, we talked about that. Blaming doesn't support anybody because you're still stuck with your problem, even if the person accepts the blame. Okay, so now what? It hasn't resolved anything, right? And the last one is bringing up the past. How many times do we do that when we're in a conflict with somebody? We bring up all the other times they showed up that way.
Of course, we like to keep score.
Right? Instead of just looking at the current situation, what's happening and how can we deal with it in a way that creates a win-win situation. So those are, 5 landmines, I call them, to avoid
all of them,
conversations.
All of them emanate from the ego mind.
Absolutely.
If you are caught up in one of those behaviors, and who hasn't been caught up in one of those behaviors, then you're caught up in your ego mind. Your ego mind wants to be right. Your ego mind wants to make the other person wrong. That is the way it operates.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, don't fault yourself for this. We all get caught up in our ego minds, no matter how enlightened we are, no matter how much work we've done.
Yes.
It hopefully happens less and less over time, but it still happens.
Mm-hmm.
So don't beat yourself up about it. Just say, oh, shit, I noticed I just got caught up in my ego mind again. And now I'm not speaking from my heart.
Yeah. We can celebrate it instead of beating ourselves up. Like you said earlier, celebrate. Hey, I just did it again. And this time I realized it. Good for me. Pat yourself on the back for noticing, right?
Yeah. I used to do, in my men's groups, we used to do these things called clearings.
Mm-hmm.
And a clearing is an actual very, very carefully defined process that allows one man who has an issue with another man to clear his energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we start top down. We start from the head and work our way down. And so, what's the issue? What's the data? What do you think about this man because of the data, and blah, blah, blah. And we let them say the judgments. We want to get those out. Because when they're out there, now you can see what you're doing. And often I would get guys who would say, oh, this guy's a real asshole. And I'd say, now, okay, we're going to stop there. This is not about abusing the other person. This is about getting down to the truth. Everybody has a different view of what an asshole is. So I want you to go a little deeper. What do you really mean? What's your real judgment? Then he goes deeper and he says, well, he ignores me. He doesn't pay attention to what I'm saying. Okay. Anything else? And just get it all out.
Yes.
And then you know where we go next? After we got all those judgments out, I say, now take another look at this man, and who do you actually see over there? Who does he remind you of?
Yeah.
And soon enough, the guy is going to say, oh, he reminds me of my father when I was, 10 years old or something. He never listened to me. I said, so you see how maybe you're projecting your father onto this man?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I said, now just go a little deeper. Do you see any aspects of yourself that you're projecting on this man? I said, are there ever times when you ignore somebody?
Yes.
And it's like instant.
Yes.
Now, what happens is these are men, okay? And men are like super macho, and I'm telling you, we get down to the guts, we get down into the belly, and there are sometimes tears, there's sometimes, it's just beautiful. And after that process is over, you should see these guys hugging each other.
I was going to say they're probably jumping up just to embrace one another.
Yeah, and I've done this with men and women as well. Men and women clearing with each other, and just women clearing with women. It is a powerful, powerful process. It is taking that conflict and actually deliberately creating connection.
Beautiful.
Powerful.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And because people feel seen and heard. And we recognize how we're so much the same. We have more similarities than differences.
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of this process, I always used to do this in a group of, 10 or 11 people or however many there were. Everyone else is standing around the circle observing and just witnessing the process. And when it's all over, I say, so how many of you learned something about yourself by watching this process? Oh, yeah, I've done that sort of thing before. I really resonate with what he said or she said or whatever. Yeah, I've done that. And I have to say, it's like anything else. It's a form of shadow work. But most people, when you talk about shadow, they're immediately going into fear. They think, oh my God, you're gonna expose some aspect of myself that I've been trying so hard not to let the world see. No, you're going to voluntarily do it. That's the way it's going to work. And we're going to do it by using all these different processes, Yeah,
what people don't recognize, David, and I'm sure you know this already, is that we think our shadows or things that we're hiding are not visible. Right. They are loud on the big screen for everybody to see because they show up in so many ways and sabotage our lives and our relationships in so many ways.
That's absolutely correct.
We think they're hidden, but because they don't look like what we think they are, but they show up in many, many different disguises and not helpful ones at that. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your steps to reconnection. Now, can you just kind of summarize those again? I'd like to, bring us towards our closing here.
Sure. Well, the first step, as we talked about more than once, is the importance of taking 100% responsibility for all of our behaviors, our reactions, our projections, our triggers, our emotions, anything that's going on for us is about us, even though it may look differently, right? So that's the first step, is taking responsibility, and then being willing to look deeper at what's really going on beneath the surface. So yes, you've been triggered. So what have you made this situation mean about you? That you're not smart enough, good enough, intelligent enough, or any of that. Usually it's about a not enough thing, right? Or the other person is trying to control you or manipulate you, whatever it is. So understanding what that is. and then going deeper from there and taking steps to heal from the wounds that where those core wounds came from, those beliefs, those limiting beliefs came from somewhere. So identifying where they came from and being willing to let them go so they no longer run your life. So that's really important. And then when you're in an actual conflict with somebody, is being willing to listen with an open heart with what they have to say, give the person an opportunity to express themselves without interjecting, without offering advice or anything like that, just listening and asking if they want any kind of support, and then coming up with agreements with them, which we didn't really have time to talk about, but being able to come up with agreements with one another of how you could work through whatever the situation is that's caused the upset, so that that doesn't become a continual pattern. Because many times when you look at conflict in relationships, there's repeated patterns. So when you can identify what the pattern is, what people's wounds are, and taking responsibility, well, how would we like to have this show up differently? And I actually have a gift, a process, that a 10-step process that people can go through to resolve a conflict peacefully that I'll share in the chat box, so people can have access to that as well. And I'll share a few other links if that's okay, just in terms of my own program that I have on the Wellness for All, and how people can get a hold of me. Is that okay?
And drop your profile link in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have the one to my not sure if I have all of that or not there, but that'll get people enough anyways. I also have a limited offer right now. It's kind of a Mother's Day promotion. If somebody wants to experience the connection practice process, I'm offering it at a 50% discount, and that's in the chat box as well with the program or the promotion code. So I hope this has been helpful.
That's been awesome. And I'm going to I'll take that link for the Resolve Conflicts Peacefully guide, and I'll put that on my website as well.
Okay.
Because it's very much in alignment with this discussion that we've been having today. So, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Great conversation.
Yeah, I can't believe we've been talking for an hour already.
Yeah, that time goes by pretty quickly here.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience. It's very rare that I have to milk it to get more out of, but sometimes a little bit of facilitation helps to create a little more conversation.
Sure.
I love having conversations with you. You're very animated. You're very wise. You've got a lot of brilliant ideas, and I really like that. So thank you so much for being here today. Do you have any final words you'd like to share before I close out?
Well, what comes to me is to just, throughout all of this, I think what really helps is to just remember and keep in our hearts that everyone, including ourselves, is always doing the best that we can with the tools that we have, and with the understanding that we have, and with the self-awareness that we have. Because I do believe, I don't know who said this quote, but I love it. If we could do better, we would do better.
Right. I think that's true for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they're pathological in some way. Most people are decent folks with big hearts who just want to spread the love. Right. All right. Well, thank you for being here, Marisa. I just really appreciate your presence, and I appreciate you. And for all of you here, I just want to remind you, while conflict is an inevitable part of life, it doesn't have to be a destructive force that pits people against each other. In fact, it can be a catalyst for greater understanding, cooperation, and enhanced relationship. The key is to embrace conflict as a natural part of life and learn how to find solutions to problems that honor everyone involved. So thank you all for watching today's program. And remember, you can watch the recordings of this and all my other shows on my website at lifemasterytv.com. And I want to invite you to remember to practice the Life Mastery mantra every day. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment.